Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. My name is Nim Grinvald. I am a technical evangelist here with Kintone. I'm joined by my colleagues Genji and Will, Connor, Christine, and Bill. And I want to thank you all for taking the time today. First thing that you're going to do is you're going to download the code and the slides. That'll enable you to follow along with me more easily. And the second thing to do, if you have not done so already, is to sign up for a developer account on Kintone. Kintone is the backend database that we're going to be using for today. It's more than just a database. We'll spend some time talking about that, and we want to make sure that you get hooked up with a free developer license. In order to do that, you'll need to sign up for the developer account, and then you'll spin up your own instance, your own Kintone subdomain. For those of you who clicked on that link that Genji posted up on the top, Genji, if you can please post that link again to get folks the code and the slide deck, you'll be taken to a GitHub page, a GitHub gist page, you'll be able to download the zip file over here to click to download everything, or you can scroll down to view the other files. To sign up for a developer account, you'll click on the link over here. Make sure you're not using Safari. You can use Chrome. You can use Firefox. Please accept cookies to make sure that it works. And then you'll sign up for your developer account. And then you'll create a Kintone subdomain. So to do that, it'll be first name, last name, email, company name, and then you'll create your subdomain. In other words, your instance, your environment, and you can name it, Max from Argentina. You can name it, what's up from Australia, or just Scott. Whatever's not taken, you can go ahead and use it as your subdomain. At which point your Kintone subdomain will then be subdomain.kintone.com. You can use alphanumeric characters and hyphens. And like I said, my name is Nim. I work for a company called Kintone. I am our technical evangelist, and joining me today from Kintone are my colleagues in Tokyo, Will and Genji. Bright and early, Ohio gozaimasu, good morning to you, and thanks for joining us. These guys are like the movers and shakers behind the content that you'll be seeing for today. So they're here to help you if you have any questions. Either one of them will be assisting. And we're also joined by Christine and Connor of Be My Apps, who have facilitated all of us coming together here today. So thank you two for all the work that you've done so far. Let's get to it. A REST and React workshop. We're going to be getting and posting data to a web database. What we're going to be covering today is we're going to create a React front end. That's going to be the page that we can go to on our browsers, and then in interacting with it, we will be interacting with a backend that we'll be passing information to. That backend will be an express server that will be an intermediary getting data from our web service, Kintone, and then fetching that data and then presenting it to our front end, our web page in our browser. Our browser will then render that data using React, and then we will be posting that data. We'll be posting additional data by creating user input and then passing the data to Kintone. And that's what we'll be doing today. And it's going to look like this. So over here, we see our Kintone backend. And what you can see is from here, we've got our React front end. We will be we're showing a list of different anime novels, and we're adding one. And what we're going to see is we've posted that information to Kintone. From here, you can see that we've added that new item to the list. And that's what we're going to be making today. So if you haven't done so already, check your versions of Node and NPM. You can type the following commands to do it. And then if you are missing either of those versions of Node and NPM, you can go ahead and follow the link over here to install those versions of Node and NPM. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to spin up a create React app uh, instance. Basically, this is boilerplate code that we will use to power our React app. There's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes. What you need to know is you're going to create a My Project folder. Then you're going to create. Then you're going to type in the following command: npx create-react-app front end. So what we're doing is we've created a folder called front end where the create React app boilerplate is going to be put into. And then once it's done installing, we're going to cd into that front end folder, and we'll open that up into VS Code. Scott's asking, does the Express server replace Node? Well, we're using Node as a way to basically handle our modules. Yeah, it's a perfect engine. So it runs on top of Node. It doesn't replace it. Okay, so what we're going to do inside of front end, because we've pulled create React app. Sorry, not we've pulled. We've spun up a create React app instance. We can use the behind the scenes boilerplate to spin up a front end development server. And so what you can do is you can type in the following command: npm start, and then there should be a tab that opens in your browser to localhost port 300, where you'll see the results of your code outputted pretty much in real time as you are editing. Now, what we're going to want to do is there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of boilerplate that we don't need. In fact, it's going to be everything in the source folder. So what we're going to do is delete all of those files in the source folder, all of them, every single one of those files in the source folder, delete them, and we are going to create a new file called index.js, and we're going to populate that file. So far, what have we done? We've created a folder called My Project. We've run a command to install create React app. Once create React app has been installed, we initialize it with npm start, which will open up a tab in our browser. That'll open up a React development server that'll allow us basically to live code. And then we're going to delete all the files in source, and we're going to replace them with a single file called index.js. Ultimately, our directory structure is going to look like this. That My Project folder is going to have a front end subfolder and a back end subfolder. The front end subfolder is going to have a few folders in here. We're gonna care about index.js. There's also another another subfolder called public, and it has index.html in there. For our backend folder, we will have a file called server.js. We first want to get an understanding of how React handles asynchronous behavior, because we're going to be getting and posting information using React as the front end. And so we have here some sample code to just walk through briefly and give you the idea of what happens when we render API responses to React. So over here, we've got this code on the left-hand side of the page. And what you can see is we've imported the React and React DOM libraries. We've created a REST endpoint. And then what we're going to do is we've created a function to handle the asynchronous get request. So what we're going to do is we make a get call to this API endpoint, and then we receive the response in JSON, and then we're going to return something called a React element. And then that React element is going to be used by the React DOM to render the page. And it's going to render it in a particular place in the HTML in an element with the ID root. And so, and that's basically React hangs all of its rendering off of a single element, which will be a div, and typically a div with the ID root, and then all of that React behavior goes. So as we've set it up right now, the issue with the issue with this sample code is that React needs to render a page while we wait for an API request to return. And a promise is like a black box. So what we're doing typically with a promise is we're saying, hey there, executable code, we have this placeholder, this container for stuff that we'll give you shortly. So just hold this container and wait until we get what we're looking for and then do something with it. But React is more impatient than that, essentially. React says, listen, I need to show something now. So if all you're giving me is this box, you're not telling me what to do with it, I don't know what to do with it. And so what we need to do is to find a way to give React instructions to present something meanwhile. We wait in the meantime as we wait for our API call to return. And so this is where the useState and the useEffect hooks that React sets up. This is part of what they're useful for. React introduces these two what we call hooks to basically handle the REST API calls. The useState hooks, they to read off of the slide over here, they allow us to use special state variables that we can utilize to render into the React UI. So basically we have this thing called a state, whatever that is. And the state is basically where React goes to check what the variables are and what variables need updating and what is the initial state of the variables that have been defined. And so in order to do that, we need a variable to hold the state, we need a variable to update the state, and we need some initial state to kick things off. And that's in fact what we're seeing over here with this this little snippet of code. We've got this array, and it corresponds to the output of a function. This function will take in an initial value, and it will spit out a two-item array. The first item will be the state, and the second will be the function. And that's a useState hook. And then a useEffect hook is going to allow us to run functions after the rendering is finished. See, React is very clever in the way that it handles rendering pages. React will re-render specific parts of the UI based on what gets updated. When we have a useEffect hook, we can use it to trigger React to re-render the UI. And that's going to be very helpful for us. Okay, so those are the useState and useEffect hooks. And now what we're going to do is we're going to live code the index.js file. So I believe, Jogs, you were asking what's in the index.js file. Tune in. We're going to be creating it right now, and we'll be walking through how we use these hooks to build out build out our API calls. Okay, so there. Here we've got our front end folder, and it's got these modules. It's got this public folder with this index.html file. Terrific. And now we've got this index.js file that we want to start creating. So what we're going to do at this point is let's begin by importing our libraries. So we want to import React. And specifically, we want to import the useState and useEffect hooks from okay. And then we also want to import React DOM from. Now we want to define our endpoint as well. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll start with our REST endpoint, and this will be yes, and then and what we're going to do, let's create some stubs. So we want, basically, we want a few things over here. We want to have a function that's going to make the API call. We want to have a function that's going to handle the rendering of the result of that call. And we also want the behavior to take that rendered result and do something with it on the page. Okay, so we've got this function over here is going to handle making our API call. This function is going to handle basically preparing a React component to that's going to include that the result of that API call, and then we actually need to render that component. So let's start with this render portion first. We're going to take this render result, and we're going to we're going to find that root element in that HTML, and we're going to inject the render result React component into that root folder. Okay, let's go here. There we go. From there, let's see. Let's bear with me 1 minute. I'm sliding some windows around. Okay, and from here, let's start by creating our API call. Okay, so first thing that we want to handle is our response, which is going to be the result of querying our endpoint. What we want to do is we want to turn that into a nice JSON response with this code right over here. Okay, and then for our purposes, we want to console log the response so it'll be easy to see. And ultimately, we're going to return a stringified version, or the JSON stringified version of that JSON. Okay. So that's what's happening in our call. So we're fetching that data from the REST endpoint, and then we're running it through like a formatting pipeline. And in the process, we're also console logging it so we can interact with it more easily. And then for our render result, now we're going to start handling state. Okay, so remember when we're handling state is a 2-item array. The first item in that array is the state, and the second is the function that handles changes in state. And that corresponds to the output of a function called useState, where you input an initial state and you're going to output a 2-item array corresponding to the current state and the function to update the state. So we're going to put inside of this value for the useState function our initial state. Our initial state is going to be now loaded. This is critical because this tells React, hey, while you're, this is your baseline. This is like you don't have to worry about not having anything to do. We're giving you your first state to handle, and then from here we'll update it. Okay. So that's our useState function, and now let's handle our useEffect function. So from here. From here, we're going to call REST API, and then whatever the result is, we're going to pass it into set API response. Okay, so and then from here, and we start. Okay, so what we're doing is we're saying that we're updating this to kick off to trigger a re-render when after the state is updated, go ahead and kick off the useEffect hook, at which point you will call the function called call REST API, and then push that result into the state. So this will trigger a re-rendering of the state. And Will, could you back me up here and just remind me what's this empty array for that's hanging off of that useEffect hook?
So that parameter is basically the timing of when useEffect is going to be running. And if you enter an empty array, it's only going to run after the initial render. But you can place in like a state variable in there. So whenever a state variable that you define state there changes, then useEffect will run.
Great. So and it's perfect. I see Nag and Afraf in the chat. It's going to run once. If you don't give an empty array, it's going to call condition. Okay, great. So for those folks who are following along with us, putting this empty array in will guarantee that the useEffect hook only triggers once. Thanks, folks. Thanks.
Just as a side note, always start off with an empty array because this is the source of infinite loops if you start placing like state variables inside.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're giving the chuckle of somebody who's had that experience before. No, my computer's blowing up. For sure. Thanks, Will. So we triggered that useEffect hook, and then what we want to do is we want to actually return essentially some template code that'll format our result the way that we want. And so we're just going to create something pretty simple, React app, and then a paragraph with our API response. So once we get once that state is updated, we're returning. Well, not once that state is going to these mustache, this little placeholder code renders our state, and it will first render now loading, and then once the useEffect hook is triggered and we call the REST API and receive the result, then the result will update API response right over here. Okay, folks, any questions so far? We'll go ahead and we'll save this, and let's take a look at what it's going to look like in our code. Wait a moment. And what have we got over here? What you should see is you should see what you should see is a something that I'm not seeing. So Will, do you have your server working so that you can you can share with everybody what the correct output looks like, what the expected output looks like?
Yeah, just one moment actually. What's happening on your end, by the way?
Looks like there was a library that I didn't install. It's throwing me an error. Cannot resolve node fetch in the source.
I see the first line.
Oh,
Nim.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Genji. Resolve node fetch. Give me 1 second, Genji. Yep, thanks, Proful. Excellent. And looks like I can just comment this one out, right? Okay. I think that ought to fix it. Yep, here we are. So folks, what just happened over there is I had an extra line of code that I didn't need. Can everybody see the React, this result? So you'll see there was a brief now loading, which was followed by the React app querying the endpoint and retrieving these results. You'll notice that with the endpoint that we're using, which is the random user.me, every time we refresh this page, we'll have a different auto-generated user. Can everybody see this? Everybody see this screen? We just get a quick thumbs up from everyone, or from whoever is going to give their thumbs up. Okay, great. Thanks, I. Terrific. Okay.
We have a comment saying that I Karasawa, it's not what I see on my screen.
Yeah, tell us what you see on your screen.
So I followed along with what you've got so far as much as I could, just because like it's a little bit hard to type as fast as like the screen scrolls up and down. What I see on my end is it just says React app and API response, and I'm wondering in that P tag for the return under render result, if I should have instead put something else. Like that's what I was kind of like typing along when you guys switched to that screen. Because I know that like the return is going to return whatever is within those tags that I have, but I didn't quite catch the end part. Like, did you leave the P tag with API response, or did you actually call it by the variable API response?
So let me see if this answers your question.
Yep, there we go. That's what I don't have. So I'm gonna add that now.
And then let me hang out with you for another 30 seconds and let's see if you're good to go.
Okay, re-rendering and
drum roll, please.
Yay, it works. Thank you.
Go team. Well done, everybody. Okay, so this gives you a pretty basic skeleton for a React front end. And we're going to transition from here to talking about our database backend, Kintone. So let's go ahead and do that.
Sorry, Nim, just a quick heads up. When you're on VS Code, can you enable word wrap so that we could see the end full code? Sorry.
Oh, thanks, man. Good call. I've gone ahead and I've enabled word wrap, so that should not be a problem in the future. Actually, I believe, no, it actually, for some reason, I need to enable it on a file by file basis. I'd be happy to figure out how we could just get, I could just get word wrap permanently enabled across all files. But in any case, are you seeing the page called "What is Kintone? Built for Teamwork, Designed for You"? Again, okay, great, thank you. So let me speak briefly about the backend database that we're using and the bigger picture of what Kintone is. So Kintone is a no-code, low-code cloud platform for teams to easily share and collaborate on their data efficiently. So what do I mean by that? Well, what you're seeing on the left-hand side is a sample screen in Kintone where we've got some reporting elements. In this case, it's a pivot table. And we are having some people comment on the bottom of that table. Why is this important? Well, you've got a lot of different backend databases, and you've got probably a dozen or half a dozen different places where you are saving data, and also a whole nother pack of applications that you're using to talk about the data. So where you could be saving data could be in a database. It could be in your local file system, like Word or Excel, or in some web application somewhere, Asana, Trello, whatever. Meanwhile, you're having conversations about the data in places like Slack, or email, or text message, or over phone, or voicemail. People even do voicemail anymore. But there's a lot of friction in spreading out what you are looking at and what you need to talk about with respect to what you're looking at. And this happens all the time. It happens so often that we're just used to needing to search for a whole bunch of stuff to find it. And where Kintone is special is that it enables the data and the conversations about the data to all happen in one place. So imagine like a lightweight database that you could use with your colleagues and peers to handle day-to-day operations and processes. So typically, you've got all of these different apps, and they're separate from, where you go to talk about the data is separate from where the data lives. And so it's unclear where the conversation's happening, the information is not being shared effectively. And so with Kintone, you can have the data live in the same place where the communication lives. And it turns out that that is a really big deal for effective collaboration and teamwork. And then you can also create workflows, what we call process management, so that the right people are seeing the right things at the right time. And Kintone does this with something called an app. An app is the basic building block of Kintone, and you can imagine it as like a spreadsheet in a workbook or a table in a database, but with a lot more power. And an app thus has a lot of the basic unit of an app is a record, and that's where we store data. What's neat about Kintone is you can create apps very, very quickly using a drag and drop form builder interface. You don't need any code for this. Why that's useful for you as coders is because you have better things to do and harder problems to solve than to spin off a data schema in a form. You can do both at the same time. And then if you want to, you can customize those apps extensively by executing client-side JavaScript. And so as a no-code platform, what that enables non-technical people to do is to self-serve things that typically their IT departments are too busy to create for them. So they can create lightweight, operations, processes and systems on the platform, and then collaborate on them effectively. So stuff like expense reporting or product catalogs or CRMs or whatever. And they can do that in a no-code way. What's cool about it for you is that as a low-code platform, you can create sophisticated customizations to enhance the apps and the platform. So ultimately, this fulfills the promise of groupware, which is what our company is about. We are here to build a society brimming with teamwork and to make teamwork better. And so how do we do that? Well, we want to have teams share meaningful insights about data and have those insights become operationalized quickly. And that's ultimately what this platform called Kintone is. It's one of its core strengths, to take that data, to take the communication about the data, to turn it into actionable results so that you can move, you can work. Your experience of work becomes a lot easier. What does this mean for you as a developer? So it means a few things. One is developers can create what we call a command center, which is like, you've got like a presentation layer that your end users are interacting with that is piping, that like has data that's piped to it from third-party web applications, or that pipes data out to some other applications. And you can use this layer to create a custom look and feel so that instead of people, dying on the inside trying to modify their ERPs, or end users like trying to work with ERPs, you've got a much friendlier way to have them crunch the data that they need on a day-to-day basis. Another thing that developers can do is they can enhance the platform by developing these JavaScript customizations and then building what we call extensions or plugins, which you can imagine as like a Chrome extension. It's a package that an end user, non-technical end user, can install and then has a settings page that they can use to configure the settings without ever needing to touch the code. And as a developer, you can build that. Inside of Kintone, we've got a sophisticated interface for developers to use. We have open, available, and free JavaScript API that you can hook into, a REST API. We have API tokens set up so that you can preserve the you've got a better way to authorize access to the API, web hooks to kick off payloads to other third-party sources, and then I had mentioned plugins, JavaScript customization. You can also customize CSS and HTML to create custom views and have very rigorous, granular, and precise permission controls so that you're making sure the right people are seeing the right things. When I talked about a custom look and feel, I wasn't kidding. These custom views allow you to use Kintone for graphing and reporting purposes, or even if you want to set up something like Space Invaders, which we'll set up and is one of the coolest things I've ever seen used in our platform. As a developer, ultimately, you can use Kintone for self-learning to play with JavaScript or to contribute your learnings to tech blogs or to share your projects with your community. If you're looking to use Kintone to create revenue, then the opportunities for you would be to create and sell Kintone extensions, to consult with firms on achieving business goals, and then to develop Kintone customizations for customers to help them make their internal teamwork better and in the process streamline their operations and give people a much more enjoyable experience at work, which I think is ultimately what many of us want, is create a Kintone app. And so we'll create our first Kintone app together. And what you see over here in this portal, just really quickly so that you can navigate with me. Over here in this area, this is an announcements pane where you can put graphs, charts, filtered lists, links, photos, anything important that all of your end users would want to see, and you can edit it easily with this WYSIWYG editor. On the right-hand side, you have something called spaces, and you can imagine a space as like a place where, like a fenced-in area for conversations and data that belong in a particular bucket. So there, like you can imagine a marketing space or a sales space or a developer space. You can also create a space to like as like a staging environment for other apps, And then we've got our apps over here. We have 4 in this list, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a new app. you may recall an app is like a spreadsheet in a workbook, like a table in a database, only with more power. And it is the basic building block of what we do. So let's create our first app. It's going to be a MangaDB app. There are several ways to create apps. You can import data from Excel or CSV, and we have an import wizard for that. You can duplicate an existing app, and then you can also use templates. There are templates that you might export from other environments, and then you also have what are like existing app templates and app pack templates. So with a few clicks, you can spin up a template for a sales CRM or expense reports or meeting minutes or whatever you'd like. What we're going to do is we're going to create an app from scratch, and it's going to be our MangaDB. So when you create the app from scratch, you'll be facing, first and foremost, our form builder. And you'll see it's got two parts to the form builder, two main parts. There's a canvas, which is currently empty, where we'll drag and drop fields. And then there's a palette, which has the list of like 29 different fields that we can drag and drop to use on Kintone. We're not just limited to 29 fields. If we needed some other kind of field that we didn't have over here, we could create a essentially like a placeholder element where we can then customize, which we can then customize with JavaScript to create whatever we want. But let's go ahead and start with the simple stuff. We'll name our app MangaDB. We can even change the icon to a briefcase because it's going to be a serious app about comic books. And from here, we'll start picking off fields and dragging and dropping them from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. We'll start with 2 text fields. And heck, why don't we add a record number as well? And maybe we can even make it look a little nice, border. Change the sizes of these text fields, and let's change the name of this. So this field name is going to be title, and what we want to do is we want to be able to refer to these fields in our code in a way that's easy to follow. And so this name field where I just changed the word text into the word title, this is not actually how the field will be referenced in our code. For that, we need this thing called field code. So if we were to reference this field in our code, we would use the aptly named field code. And we're going to change ours from text to title, so it'll be easier to track. We're going to do the same thing with this text field over here, which we're going to change to author and author. Record number, we change to record ID. And this is auto-generated for each entry. We'll go ahead, we'll save, and we'll activate the app. So you notice there are 2 steps over here. We're going to save. This is almost like creating, like saving our development work, and then activating pushes it to production. So here we are in our app. As I mentioned, it's a table in a database or a spreadsheet in a workbook. There's no data in it, so this blank page is entirely expected. You know what? Let's go ahead and we'll add a field. So we'll add a record just for the hell of it. Genji, what's the name of a manga title and author? I think there's one you called Bleach, right?
Yeah, there's Bleach.
Taito Kubo.
Oh, typed. Thank you.
Did I get Taito Kubo?
I'll put it in the chat.
Taito Kubo. Oh, not too far off. There we go. Taito Kubo. Cool.
Actually, it's called tight. I just Googled it. It's actually tight. But yeah.
No problem. No.
Whichever's fine. Yeah.
As I'm editing the page, it's very easy to edit these records. And if we go back to our MangaDB, we'll see we've got 1 record over here. All right, very cool. So at this point, you'll want to make sure you've got your Kintone app set up with those 3 fields. You want to make sure that those 3 fields have been renamed. That's critical. If you don't rename those field codes and you're referencing them by some other name, you're going to run into errors. So from here, we're going to make a few changes. And I'll walk through it very quickly. So we're going to change this endpoint to, actually, let's comment this out. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called get Kintone data. And it's a replacement for our call REST API, although it'll look very similar in certain respects. And the first is the request endpoint. And it's going to look a little bit like this. Oops. We want to use template strings over here. So this will be your subdomain, and it'll be your subdomain.kintone.com. App equaling your app ID. You might be wondering, what's app ID? I'll show you momentarily. So what is an app ID? In Kintone, and Genji, are you seeing my portal?
Sorry, no. Oh, now
We are.
yes.
Okay. You'll see in MongoDB, I've got this URL over here, devevents.kintone.com/k/30. This number 30, this is our app ID. This is the number we're going to want in our code when we are using an API request to communicate with this app. This app will be referenced by the app ID 30. So the only thing that we need, well, there are two separate things that we need from this URL. The first is your subdomain. The second is the app ID, and you need nothing else. So only your subdomain, only your app ID. Yours will very likely be different from mine. And from here, we will go back to VS Code. Can you see this? Can you see my screen? And you're going to want to add some variables in here. So there's subdomain, and in my case, it's devevents. Okay, yours will be different. And your app ID will be some number. For me, the number is going to be 30. Okay, and then we're going to want an API token, which we'll come back to shortly. All right, so we've got our endpoint. Now we need to handle a few small changes, namely around the way that we handle CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. So right now I'm setting up the options header for our fetch request. And the header that we will need to handle is a header called Sybos API token. What does that mean? Well, very briefly, Sybos is the name of Kintone's parent company. This is simply an API token header for Kintone. Okay. So we've got these options in this object, and now we're going to do pretty much what we did before in the way that we handle the response. We will fetch the request endpoint, and we will pass along the fetch options. Once we get that response, we're going to want to manipulate the response so that it's recognized as JSON, and we'll then unlock the response, and then return the stringified version of that response. Okay. Everything else is almost the same. The only thing that's different over here is we're going to be getting the Kintone data in useEffect. So there's only one thing that's missing right now. Oops. And that's the API token. Let me show you how to get the API token. In your Kintone environment, you're going to go into the app settings. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I'm going to just track with the participants. Folks, go ahead and raise your electronic hand if you're with me. If you're with me, go ahead and raise your electronic hand. I'm with you. 1, 2. Still trying to type the VS Code code. All right. 4 people. I'm going to wait another minute or so. All right, we've got 6 folks. Same as above. Can you display? Yes, of course. Folks, can you see my screen? Can you see my, can you see the VS Code screen?
Yep, showing index.js.
Great. All right, folks. All right, so what I want to demonstrate over here, and it's okay wherever you got in this so far, okay? What I want to demonstrate over here is issues with cross-origin resource sharing. So to do that, I'm going to grab an API token. I'm going to do that by, and Will, can you just give me a quick thumbs up if you're seeing my Kintone environment? Okay. I'm going to go into the app settings. And there are 4 tabs over here: form, views, graphs, app settings. In the app settings tab, the 4th one, there's an API token setting. And we're going to click on that API token setting and generate an API token. Click the generate button, and let's view and add records. So I'll grab this. I'm going to copy that, view and add records with the permissions that I want to give this API token. Copy it, save, and what we've done is we've saved it in essentially a development version. What we want to do is update app. Update app. We're going to apply the changes to the activated app, and then we go back to our code and put in the API token. Okay. So the issue here is when I refresh my React app, I'm going to get an error. Okay, you'll see now loading. I'm not actually, there's nothing that's displayed. There's something that went awry with the fetch request. And we've got an error that says access to fetch from origin has been blocked by the CORS policy. Response to pre-flight request doesn't pass access control check. Redirect is not allowed for pre-flight request. And so what's happening over here, very briefly, is that we are trying to we are trying to access an API without we're trying to access an API without no, let me say it a different way. Here we are on localhost, and the server is expecting to return information from localhost. So in other words, if we were, let me put it this way, if we were on google.com and there was some code that we're running on google.com that made our machine call like nefariouswebsite.com or xkcd.com or some other website, we would run into security issues. And so one of the reasons why we have servers is so that they handle these calls for us. So that once we're on google.com, if we need something from some website over there.com, it is the Google servers who are doing that on our behalf. And that's the reason why we're building a backend database. So we have literally something called a server that's handling these requests for us, right? And so the way that we handle this then is by spinning up a server. There are other ways to handle CORS errors. For our purposes, we're going to be building a backend server. And so what I'd like you to do, can you all see? Well, can you see my my VS Code screen? Okay, terrific. What we're going to do is we're going to create a folder called backend. Okay, and excuse me. In backend, we're going to create an Express project. So we do that by, so here I am in my backend folder. And I would, from here, I'll initialize an NPM environment. Now I've already done that over here, but you'll type in npm initialize, and you can just hit enter through all of the different prompts that you're given until so that you skip all the questions. And ultimately, you're going to want to install the following packages, which you'll use npm to install. Once you've installed Express and Node Fetch and the CORS package, you're going to create a server in the backend. Sorry, you're going to create a server.js file in your backend folder. Okay. Once you've done that, you should see your VS Code environment will reflect that it has an npm instance. Can you see my backend? Can you see my
index.js?
Yeah, great. So see,
Now server.js.
Yeah, and I've got a server.js file, and I've got my npm, my node package manager initialized over here. Okay. From there, once you've got that set up, you can spin up your server. So you'll do that by server.js. And so here we're listening on localhost port 5000. So from here, let's code our server. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pull in those packages that we installed. Okay, from here, we're going to set our port and set up some more Express boilerplate. And we're going to, in this boilerplate over here, enables us to parse incoming requests with JSON payloads. So again, this is some more Express boilerplate. And then we're going to handle our cross-origin resource sharing adding some windows around. So we're going to set up our Kintone, we're going to do our Kintone API setup over here. So I'm going to go back to index.js. I'm going to grab this information and I'm going to drop it inside inside server.js. And then what we're going to want to handle is some parameters that are going to be appended to the URL that we'll be using as our endpoint. We're going to handle two things at once over here. We're going to handle our no, actually, we're going to yes, okay, got it. We're going to create an endpoint that corresponds to getting multiple records. What I'm going to do, I'm going to grab it from this server.js file, or sorry, this index.js. It's going to be this bad boy, but with some minor changes. Thanks, Genji. Yep, Genji is dropping these strings for you in the chat. And these parameters are just going to describe the way that our GET request presents the information, the way that it's ordered and the way that it's filtered. In this case, it's not filtered, it's just ordered. Okay, and from here, we're going to start defining an endpoint that our front end will access. We're going to create an endpoint called getData. It's going to need to handle the CORS options, which we'll pass in over here. And then we're going to handle the asynchronous behavior. And our headers, which you might recall, we had a header called X sideways API token, which corresponds to our API token that we dropped up on the top. And this code, again, this is going to look very familiar. We're fetching, we're using this fetch function to create a GET request to the URL, pushing in these options. Then once we receive that response, we want to massage it into JSON and have the JSON response be recognized as JSON. We're almost done with our server. The next thing that we want to do is we want to set up the app, in other words, the Express server, to listen on a specific port. That's port 5000. And we'll just indicate over here that, you know, okay. So what have we done? Well, we created the backend using an Express server. We set up some boilerplate for that Express server. We handled our cross-origin resource sharing. We set up an endpoint for our GET request, and then we set up a routing behavior so that when we go to the get data URL, this behavior will happen. We'll make an API call and we'll return that information. Okay, so this is our back end. And now our front end, we're going to make a few small changes. So first, let's change this request endpoint. We're going to want to look for every instance of request endpoint, and we're going to want to change it to the get records endpoint. You might wonder, how am I doing that all at the same time? Command D on VS Code, Command D on a Mac is going to enable you to basically find all of the instances of a specific string in your code and change them all at the same time. As for the URL, we can make this change right over here. Local host for 5,000, get data, save that. And we need to make just a few small changes over here. And what are those changes? This is going to be the same. This is the same. Contain data. What we're going to do is we're going to shelve this. Yeah, we're going to do it this way. Let's shelve this get Kintone data function, okay? And we're going to return to our tried and true call REST API. Notice I moved my constants up. I'm gonna change this URL up here. Let's uncomment it. Yeah, I actually don't think that I need this anymore. Let's comment this out. So, okay, we've got our import statements, we've got our REST endpoint, which we're going to call, what are we going to call this? Let's just call this REST endpoint for now. You know what? Sorry, folks, I'm getting a little indecisive over here, and that is not helpful to you. We're going to stick with get records endpoint. Get records endpoint shows up in two places. You can command D that. And we've got our call REST API function. Geez, I'm a little bit all over the place here. I apologize, folks. This is less complicated than I'm making it. We have a function called call REST API. Inside the render result React component, we're going to hook call REST API into useEffect. The behavior for our call REST API function is going to be querying get records endpoint. Then we're reformatting the JSON response. And then there are some small changes that we need to make in the way that React handles lists. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to code a little like formatting way of handling the formatting that returns when we receive an array of items. So what we want to do is we're going to take JSON response. JSON response is an object that returns. It has a property on it called records, okay, which makes sense. We're getting a bunch of records from a database. They're going to come back. there's going to be a property on that JSON response object called records. What we want to do with it is we want to map for each record. We're going to we're gonna make a change, and that change is going to be this for every record, for every item in that array of records, we're going to turn it into a list item. And there's going to be a key associated with it. Now, React requires that if you're returning a list of items, that they have a unique key. We're going to use the record ID for that because the record ID guarantees uniqueness. And then from there, we're going to pick off the title. We're going to pick off the title. And the author. Oh, there we go. Good. Written by director.author.value. So each item in that array is going to be a record. That record has a property on it. The record is an object. So we've got an array of this records array is an array of objects. Each record has a property on it called title. The title key has another object inside it, inside of which is a property called value. And it's the same thing with author and value as well. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to return an array of lists. Okay, let's see. How are we doing? We're going to pull up our app. Oh, and I've got an error. Cannot read property of undefined. So it looks like what are we doing here?
Hey, errors.
Go back to your code because I think you might have when you're mapping. I only know this just because I do this all the time, but I think you need like where's your map part?
Sorry, you don't have the
need to wrap
API
it.
token?
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say for your LI, I think you need to wrap that in a return. Potentially, I don't know. That's just maybe it's a syntax thing. That's just how I usually do it at work. Yeah, for your LI.
Yeah, it's one line. So
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. If you have a multi-line, because yes, I'm word wrapping over here, but this is one line. But if I return, but like typically, yes, I would return over here if it was more than one line.
Okay.
I don't think that's the issue. And thank you very much for
The error is basically saying that the object doesn't have a map function. So the object that you're getting is wrong. Genji suggested that you didn't set an API token.
Or I want to see if like
Yeah.
server.js was properly set up with the Kintone credentials.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you, Akira Sawa. Okay, you got that.
You got that. Can you go up again? Scroll up again. I want to see the query was. Do we have a query?
Sorry, this looks like the index.js.
That's index.js, server.js.
Okay, you want server.js? Yep.
Yeah.
So let's take a look.
Yep, looks good. Oh no. Okay. What is your terminal running the server look like? Does it post any errors?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm getting an error. It says the specified API token does not match. So I'm looking in the console in my, looks like I have an API issue. Specified API token does not match the API token. You may have missed click update app. Oh, that is possible.
That could be a possibility. Another thing is you might have generated an API token for the wrong application, which could happen for some of our viewers today. So I think in our example, we might have.
Go ahead and
stated the app ID 1, but in Nim's case, he should have stated the app ID 30. I mean, that could be one thing.
Yeah. And so folks, what we're expecting is to return a list of records from Kintone. Now I only put in one record into Kintone, so you may, so it'll depend on the number of records that you've put in. But you'll get the expected result is to get a list.
This is what I have on my end, so everything's going fine. So the issue I stated actually was that might have occurred on Nim's end is the app ID issue. Just quickly get my developer license. So I've generated an API token for the app ID of 1, and that should be stated inside the code here. On the server.js side, so app ID 1, I'm not sure if Nim has changed that to number 30 on his end.
I have, yes.
You have, okay.
That's a good point.
Yep. Yeah, otherwise I think it might be the issue with the terminal. It's not an issue with the terminal, an issue with the backend with server.js. Yeah.
As is typical with these things, I imagine if we put another 3 to 5 minutes into it, we can.
Yeah. So like any changes you make to the backend, you need to restart the server to have it applied. So that might be one thing. But we do have the full code on the GIST.
So for those who want to continue on, the next steps are inside of your Express server. You'll want to create another endpoint, and then you'll also want to create another route to post data. When you post data, the difference is that you're going to need to post like a body that will be passed in with the request. And so we'll need to format that body appropriately and format the options appropriately. And then that'll conclude the setup on the back end. Perfect. Will, yeah, could you please scroll down so we can talk a little bit about the kind of behavior that's going to happen in the back end. So what you'll see over here is that top part. This is all like Express server boilerplate. And let's scroll down a little bit. There's more boilerplate here. We've set up our options. There's our Kintone information. There's our single record endpoint. So that multiple records endpoint is for getting multiple records. Single record endpoint is for posting a record in. And then we've got our get behavior, our get route. And the next thing we're going to want to set up is our post route, which Will is highlighting right here. So you'll see there's a body over there. There are options where we'll pass in our API token and format the JSON response. Okay. Then on our front end, we'll need to make a few changes. So on our front end, we will add that post data route. We're going to make some small adjustments to the, yep, exactly, that add record endpoint. And then we're going to create a function called add new record, which will handle the posting behavior on the front end side. So we're going to be posting this. We're going to be posting this to our backend server, which will then post to Kintone. And then from here, we're going to need to handle the state for our new inputs, for the title and the author, and for our for our success counter. And that way, what will happen is, and Will, can you scroll down? Yeah, we'll handle we'll create like a form templating like for the React component. And Will, can you scroll down so we can show our participants what it looks like when it's all set up? This is what happens when you draw the rest of the owl. You'll see there are 2 input fields for title and author. There's a button where we can add data. And when we add that data, there will be like there will be a new bullet point that will be added. There will be an initial state, which will say something like loading, and then we'll be presented with the new the new record that we put into Kintone, and then we can actually verify in Kintone that we've built that. Will, can you please scroll down?
Now.
Oh, okay, yeah, let's scroll up. Yeah, so that's and why don't I go ahead and take back the screen. At this point, let's go ahead and start wrapping up, folks. I understand we're leaving the post routing on the server side and on the front end side to be an exercise, and I do want to emphasize that we really are available to you. You can reach out to us well, we'll talk about that in just a second. Let's wrap up. Today, what we did, we started a React project on the front end. We called the random user generated API. We outputted it into React. Rendered an API response with useState and useEffect hooks. We spun up an express server and avoided the CORS errors. And then we started to set up the posting behavior as well as the getting behavior. And from here, if you want to learn more about how to render these responses, how to overcome CORS errors, how to get the data from the web database, we have an article series that you can follow. You can click the link over here, and it'll take care. It'll give you again very in-depth and clear documentation on how to proceed. So from here, what could you do? You can handle the response that it renders as tables. You can make the post requests harder or more complicated or having more fields. We've got a great list of public APIs that you can play with. You can deploy your React app on Heroku, share your experience on dev.to, and reaching out to us on the Kintone developer community forum, on Stack Overflow, and as comments to our YouTube videos as well. And I want to thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for your undivided attention. We really appreciate you all staying till the end. We also want to give a special shout out to Hack Buddy by JavaScript LA and React Chicago. Bill, maybe if you want to have a moment just to talk about that upcoming event.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. So 2 weeks from tonight, August 11th, we're actually doing an in-person meetup for the first time in a year and a half. It's at a venue called Lou's Backyard on downtown Chicago and the West Loop area. And we still got a lot of RSVPs open and waiting. We're gonna have free food, drinks. There'll be some lightning talks, a lot of mingling and networking. So if you can make it, check it out. It's on the React Chicago meetup page for the August 11th event. So thanks. And if you're interested in giving a talk too, let me know.
Thank you, Bill. Obviously, it's going to be a great time, so we hope to see you there. So thank you again to our partners. And so if you guys really enjoyed the content that we went over today, we do have future workshops coming up. And so if you want to get in the meetup, just go to the URL of bit.ly/KDP_events.